The wedding dress was still lying on the chair, the white lace stained with champagne that hadn't yet dried. And Clarice still couldn't believe that my wedding night had begun with a text message. On Daniel's phone screen, the name Marianne lit up with a tiny red heart beside it. He smiled the smile I had thought for 8 years was only mine. An hour later, he left the hotel, saying it was an emergency call. Through the glass window, I saw him get into the car, still wearing his wedding suit with the boutonniere attached. Behind me, the room was filled with white roses. But I swear, from that moment on, their scent only carried the coldness of betrayal. The next morning, before I could shake off the feeling of being strangled by an invisible hand, the phone rang. The screen showed the name Esther Reed, and before I even touched it, a chill ran down my spine. Her voice cut through like a sharpened blade. "Clarice, if you don't know how to be a proper wife, don't expect my son to come back. You've made him lose interest." I closed my eyes. Part of me wanted to scream, another part wanted to collapse. Instead, I spoke slowly, each word laid down like a card on the table. "Then you'd better prepare yourself. This time you'll face the consequences." She went silent for a second. The sound of her breathing over the phone was thick with contempt, then hung up. I stared at the phone, feeling hollow, yet one thing was clearer than the pain itself. There would be no begging, no hoping for someone to fix what they had willingly destroyed. I had to stand up and act. I walked down the hotel stairs with an empty bag. My footsteps on the luxurious carpet sounded strange, like they belonged to someone else. In my hand was a small piece of paper with a single blunt sentence: "I need space to think." I set it on the pillow and closed the door without looking back. The flight home felt endless. The whole time I replayed every memory, every laugh, every promise, trying to find a single thread that could tie it all together. Instead of answers, I found something else, a cold storm brewing in my mind. They might have stolen my wedding night, but they couldn't take away my right to the truth. As soon as I landed, I called Luke, a former friend, now a forensic auditor, a man who valued truth more than comfort. "Luke, can you meet me right now?" When he opened the office door, he greeted me with his usual kind smile, but his eyes quickly turned alert. "Clarice, are you okay?" he asked, pulling out a chair and setting a cup of coffee in front of me without judgment. I began to talk. The text message, the name Marianne, the midnight disappearance, the cutting call from Esther. Luke listened quietly, nodding occasionally. When I finished, he asked just one question: "Do you have access to your joint bank account?" I took my phone from my bag. "Yes. But I haven't checked it." I unlocked my phone and handed it to Luke. He typed quickly. Each tap tightened my chest. Then, in the transaction history, he pointed to one line: a large transfer, with a clear date and recipient Marianne Collins LLC. Luke looked at me, weighing his words carefully. "This shows intent," he said seriously. "This isn't cheating. Someone's been moving money from your joint account to a company. You might have been scammed, or someone's forging your signature." My mind felt like it was wrapped in ice. At first I wanted to scream from the betrayal. Now a new emotion took over: rage, restrained by a sharp, focused resolve. I said quietly, "Luke, I want you to find out everything. That company's name, find the real owner. Check every contract, every transfer, anything connected to my family's assets. And keep it all secret." He nodded, his expression supportive but cautious. "You're sure you want to go all the way? If this is a scheme, it could get messy legally, publicly, even within your family." I took a deep breath, tasting metal on my tongue, not the taste of tears, but of determination fully forged. "All the way," I answered. "But on my terms, cold, calculated, emotion under control. I need to know who's behind this. Once I do, I'll decide what comes next." Luke jotted a few notes, shifting into action mode immediately. We weren't trying to mend a storm cloud, we were preparing for the storm itself. I left his office with a list of tasks and a strange sense that my pain was slowly turning into a weapon. Back home, I opened the drawer, the one that held our things, and saw the wedding ring lying still on its black velvet cushion. I didn't take it off, nor did I throw it away. I kept it as evidence, proof that I had once walked through a life that now needed to be examined, analyzed, and, if necessary, avenged with equal precision. 3 days later, The house had grown so silent that even the ticking clock felt like a stab in my ears. The phone no longer rang, only flickered now and then with bank alerts, red numbers shrinking, then disappearing. Daniel didn't come home. No calls, no texts. His suitcase was gone from the closet, along with the familiar scent I used to associate with safety. On the third morning, the hotel receptionist called, her voice polite but uneasy. "Mrs. Reed, we'd like to confirm the payment for your stay in the Bahamas. The invoice was sent to your email." I had never been to the Bahamas, never booked a room there. But in the attached email, there it was, full electronic signatures and two names written clearly: Daniel Reed and Marianne Collins. The same woman who had stood beside me at my wedding. The one who'd held my bouquet, smiling at me with eyes that seemed to bless me. I didn't know how long I stood staring at the screen. Images rushed through my mind: college classes, nights she cried over her ex, hugs I thought were genuine. Maybe I had never noticed the person closest to me was the one holding the knife. That afternoon, I went to the bank. The teller looked uneasy as she double-checked the data. "This withdrawal. It has your signature, along with your personal verification code." The over-the-counter withdrawals used a forged signature with my verification code. The online transfers funneled straight into Marianne Collins LLC. I let out a faint laugh, my voice hoarse. I never signed anything. And I never authorized anyone to withdraw money. The teller swallowed hard, her eyes full of sympathy as if apologizing for something beyond her control. But I knew this wasn't their fault. That night, I sat in the dark kitchen, a pile of printed bank statements before me. Each number felt like a clean-cut, deep, bloodless final. I didn't cry. That night, I went back to Luke Patterson's place, the colleague from our old forensic project. When he opened the door, I said just one sentence: "I need you to help me find myself again." He didn't ask anything else. He gestured for me to come in, made coffee, and waited silently. I handed him the folder: bank statements, emails, hotel invoices, and finally, an attached contract from another email I had received. Marital Asset Transfer Agreement, Clarice Reed. Luke skimmed through the documents, then set his cup down. "Clarice, if what I'm reading is real, someone has forged your signature. This isn't about love anymore, it's deliberate fraud. What are they trying to do?" He circled a small line in the corner of the document. "The person who submitted this contract was Esther Reed, your mother-in-law. This proves she knew, or was directly involved." A chill ran down my spine. My hands trembled slightly. "She thinks I'll stay silent, like every other bride in their family. But she's wrong." Luke nodded. "I'll investigate. It'll take a few days to trace the violent money flow and the people involved. But Clarice, you need to be prepared. What you're about to see might be more than betrayal. I've already lost enough, Luke. There's nothing left that can scare me." He looked at me, the look of someone who knew that this kind of calm didn't come from courage, but from pain that had hit rock bottom. He turned on his computer and began tracing the accounts. The light from the screen reflected on my face, mirroring a pair of eyes I no longer recognized, eyes that no longer searched for love, but were learning to read truth from the ruins. Outside, it started to rain lightly. I heard the drops hitting the glass roof, each one like the ticking beat of something about to shift. In my mind, the pieces began to align. Daniel's disappearance wasn't random, Marianne wasn't the other woman, and Esther Reed. Perhaps she had never seen me as a daughter-in-law. I slowly stood up, looking out the window where the city lights blurred behind the rain. Everything in me was changing from pain to clarity, from weakness to awareness. I knew that when morning came, the obedient wife Esther thought she knew would no longer exist. The Reed mansion sat deep within the hills on the south side of the city, where tall pines hid the sky. I slowed down as I passed through the heavy iron gate, watching the row of lights along the driveway flicker on with each turn of the wheels. The pale yellow glow lit up the bronze statues of the family's ancestors, cold, distant faces that seemed to follow my every breath. Esther Reed was already waiting in the living room. Same posture as always, stiff collar, perfect pearl necklace, a teacup in front of her like part of a ritual. I hadn't planned to sit, but she motioned lightly for me to come in. "Clarice, you came earlier than I expected." Her voice was calm and smooth, as if we were about to discuss the weather, not betrayal. I stood tall, clutching the folder Luke had given me the night before. I'm here to clarify the asset transfer contract. You were the one who submitted it. She raised an eyebrow, her lips curving slightly. Oh really? Didn't Daniel tell you? He's simply reclaiming what already belongs to him. Those papers are procedure. The way she said it sent chills through me. Every word fell in perfect rhythm, measured, calculated, unshaken. I looked into her eyes and saw a hollow coldness there, not hatred, not regret, the arrogance of someone who'd long mastered control. You're covering for your son, I said quietly but firmly. Or worse, you're helping him deceive me. Esther laughed, a soft, ringing sound, like glasses clinking in a banquet hall. Do you really think you understand this family, Clarice? Daniel did what he had to do. We protect what belongs to our bloodline, that's all. You're an outsider who wandered onto the wrong chessboard. An outsider, I repeated, each word cutting through my teeth. What about the daughter-in-law you once called the pride of the Reed family? Is she an outsider too? Esther smiled without answering. She set her teacup down, leaned back, her eyes gleaming with contempt hidden behind politeness. Pride? Clarice, you were a mistake, a beautiful one but still a mistake. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, but something in her tone told me she knew more than I imagined. Not about the forged contract. About everything. As I turned to leave, her voice drifted after me, quiet, but clear enough to pierce through the air. Prepare the documents. She must not find out about the house in Savannah. I froze mid-stride, my heart pounding like someone had struck my chest. Savannah? I had never heard Daniel mention that place. Why a house in Savannah? The butler, a gray-haired man with a blank expression, bowed slightly. Yes, ma'am. I didn't look back. I kept walking, each step heavier as if dragging the weight of the entire carpeted hallway behind me. When the grand door closed behind me, I stopped on the front steps, breathing in the cold wind sweeping through the garden. In my mind, the word Savannah kept echoing. On the drive home, I called Luke. He picked up immediately. Clarice? The house in Savannah. Have you ever seen that name in their records? Ah. Savannah? He paused for a few seconds. Wait. Let me check the database. The sound of typing came through the speaker. Each keystroke matched the rhythm of my heartbeat. Finally, his voice dropped, steady but heavy. Yes. An old property, purchased 4 years ago, under Daniel Reed's name. But the payment source came from your account. I almost couldn't believe it. My account. Yes. A hidden transaction, routed through 3 intermediaries. If you don't dig deep, you'd never notice. Clarice, are you sure you never signed any related documents? I closed my eyes. The image of the forged Clarice Reed signature flashed before me. My voice turned hoarse. No. I never did. Luke exhaled on the other end. I think this is the start of a larger financial manipulation scheme. Maybe not Daniel. Esther's involved deeply. And possibly someone else too. I looked at the road ahead, the long stretch of streetlights flickering as if fighting not to go out. The house in Savannah. Esther didn't want me to know about it, which meant there was something there she needed to hide. Luke, I want you to find every document related to it. Who owns it legally, where the money originated, and who manages the property. It'll take a few days, he said. But I'll get it done. I ended the call and held the phone for a long time. Everything was unfolding, just not in the way I hoped. Part of me wanted to believe Daniel had been pulled into his mother's schemes. But another part, the one rising stronger by the minute, understood that sometimes, cold blood isn't inherited. It's chosen. That night, I opened the filing cabinet in my study. Between old envelopes and unpaid bills, I found something pressed at the bottom, an unsent letter in Daniel's handwriting. There were only a few lines, but each word froze my heart. Clarice, don't look for me. Everything was arranged long ago. Savannah doesn't belong to us. And if you're smart, you'll leave this game before it's too late. The next morning, I received a message from Luke. Meet me at the office at 10 a.m. There's something important. I arrived earlier than planned, and when he walked in, I recognized the expression of someone who had opened a door no one ever wants to open. On the desk was a thick brown file, its edges worn and frayed. Luke opened it, speaking slowly. Clarice, I found the records about the house in Savannah. He flipped through a few pages and stopped at one with an old notarized seal. It clearly stated, owner, Reed Holdings LLC, funding source, account of Clarice Hale. I stared at the line bearing my name, feeling as if someone had read out a crime I didn't know I'd committed. Reed Holdings was Daniel's company. I had never invested, never signed anything, but the seals, the signatures, everything looked flawless. Too flawless. Luke slid another sheet toward me. There's something else you need to know. That house, it used to belong to your grandfather. The air in the room grew heavy. I looked up, meeting his gaze. It was no longer the look of a professional auditor, but of a friend who dreaded what he had to say next. My grandfather. Luke nodded, then pulled out a copy from the archives. The house in Savannah, property number 421B. Attached note. Transfer incomplete, temporary custodian, Esther Whitmore. My hands gripped the armrest. Whitmore, Esther's maiden name before she married Daniel's father. A thin thread connecting 2 generations, and now it was tightening around me. My voice trembled. She used to be my grandfather's secretary, didn't she? Luke looked straight into my eyes and nodded. Not his secretary. She managed all of his legal documents and assets for over 20 years. When he disappeared, Esther was the last person to sign the papers sealing his estate. Fragments of scattered memories suddenly rushed back into my head. I remembered the time I followed my father to my grandfather's memorial, the solemn room, the unfamiliar faces, and a woman standing at the end of the row, dressed in black, wearing silk gloves, her gaze cold and composed amid the mourning. Only now did I realize that was Esther. I took a deep breath. Luke, are you sure that house was purchased with my account? He turned his computer screen, opening the transaction ledger. This is the history from the old bank, from when you still used the personal Hale account. The transfer took place 4 years ago, matching the date Daniel established Reed Holdings. I leaned back in the chair, feeling the floor tilt. 4 years ago. That's before I married him. Exactly, Luke said, and there's more. He opened another document, yellowed paper, handwriting in pale blue ink. Temporary authorization receipt, signed Esther Whitmore, legal representative. Beneath it was a small note, Hare not yet qualified to manage the estate. Authorization reserved until further notice. I stared at that line for a long time. Heir meaning me, and not yet qualified to manage, meaning someone decided for me. I said quietly but clearly, Esther didn't know. She planned this years ago. Luke nodded. I think so. When your grandfather disappeared, she could have exploited her access to hold back valuable assets, then used her son's name to legalize them. Each word landed like a steady drop in my mind. The picture was forming. A woman who once served my family became my mother-in-law, and all this time she quietly drained whatever remained of my family's assets to build the Reed empire. Light from the window reflected off the desk onto the black and white photo in the file, the man standing beside the old Savannah mansion, an ancient oak tree draped in moss behind him. My grandfather. His gentle face, a faint smile, and, half hidden at the photograph's edge, the figure of a woman with her hair pinned up, wearing a high-collared blouse. Esther. I reached out and touched the photo. My fingertip trembled. She's been there. From the start. Luke was silent. I knew he was letting me piece together the final fragments, and I did it slowly, like peeling back layers of skin from an old, dead truth. What about Daniel? I asked. Hard to say. Maybe he didn't know, or he knew and turned a blind eye. All the documents are in his company's name, but the funds and authorizations were handled by his mother. I looked at him, my gaze steady. So it wasn't Daniel who took from me. It was her. She used her son's hand to hide it. Luke nodded. Clarice, if you plan to confront them, prepare carefully. This isn't marriage or property, it's a legal network built over 20 years. She knows how to turn truth into a typo. I gave a dry smile. I used to think I was merely the victim of betrayal. Now I know I'm the last living piece on a chessboard they set up generations ago. Luke said nothing more. He placed a copy of the title certificate before me. Under the bold heading Savannah Estate was the most recent note, updated 8 months ago, Manager Esther Reed. I looked at the paper, and in that instant, Fear gave way to a different stillness sharp as metal touched to ice. Luke, can you get the original file? I asked. Yes, but it will take time. The Georgia State Archives aren't easy to access. I'll go. He looked up, startled. Clarice, you're planning to go to Savannah alone? I pressed my lips together and nodded slightly. If that's where it started, I need to see it with my own eyes. There's something in that house. They're afraid I'll find. Luke opened his mouth to say more, then fell silent. He knew advice couldn't stop someone determined to reclaim their past. I closed the strange file. Outside, the midday sun slanted through the window, sweeping a thin streak of light across my face. I decided I would go to Savannah. And I would uncover what Esther wanted buried. Marianne's gallery sat hidden in a narrow alley, warm yellow lights making the paintings seem to breathe. The glass door was ajar as I stepped in. The scent of oil, paint, fresh paper and candles, scents I once found romantic now turned hostile. Marianne stood amid a group of landscape paintings, one hand leaning on a frame like an actor too practiced in her role. She turned. A smile spread immediately, no surprise, no embarrassment. Clarice, she said, her voice thin but sharp. Daniel said you liked this one. She pointed at a deep blue piece. Her words were a sharpened blade. I refused to be drawn into the performance. I set the file on the table and looked straight at her. I didn't come to look at paintings, Marianne. I came for an explanation. She sneered and stepped closer, the space between us no more than a breath. Explanation? You won't like the truth. She shrugged, cold as someone reciting a memorized script. Daniel is a tool. The real operator is his mother. She promised to clear my debts. In return, I had to keep Daniel by my side. Heat rose in me, but I forced myself to stare straight on. Anger is easy, what's hard is using it without letting it drown reason. And how did you do it? Did you exploit our friendship? My voice was dry, not pleading, just the query of someone betrayed who refuses to beg. Marianne lifted her chin, eyes gleaming as if displaying a trophy. He wanted pity. He wanted someone to think he was a victim of greed or illness. I wanted a lifestyle without debt. It was a trade. I give him safety. He gives me what Esther promised. My anger crystallized into sharp questions. And Esther? Where does she fit in? She moved closer, whispering as if revealing a sweet secret. She's everywhere. She hides documents, signs authorizations, runs the money flow. Daniel? He follows orders. They needed an outsider, a fresh face to fool society, and you, Clarice, were the perfect face. I remembered the wedding moments, the congratulations, the smiles concealing intent. My chest tightened, but I refused to cry. My stillness pleased Marianne. She curled her lip, triumphant. You think you're a victim? She continued, contemptuous. Esther says you inherited what should belong to them. She's taking it back. I drew my phone from my pocket not to call, but to activate the recorder I'd prepared. I knew Marianne would boast, spin words to soothe herself. And I knew her words would be the most valuable evidence. Marianne, I said, my voice ice. I'm recording this. Everything you admit is being recorded. I pressed the button. A small indicator blinked. She didn't notice in the gallery light. Her eyes widened, then she smiled as if accepting a dare. Record it, she challenged. Record everything. I'm not afraid of your cameras or your little device. I needed her truth on her own tongue, not the messy testimony of someone coerced, but a voluntary confession. Marianne continued, unaware she was signing her own sentence. She painted the details, how Esther funneled part of the estate into hidden accounts. How Marianne used our close relationship to lure Daniel into withdrawing funds. How signatures were forged. How contracts were signed with Clarice Reed to legitimize the transfers. The more I heard, the colder my heart became, yet my mind lit up with each connection. Each of Marianne's sentences was a puzzle piece, each admission a thread leading to Esther. When she stopped, I managed a smile, not happy, but like someone who had touched the bottom of a chasm and found a way up. So you think you've won? I asked softly, almost whispering. You think Esther can forever control things from the shadows? Marianne fell silent. Now I could see worry lines creeping around her eyes, a crack in her confident facade. Who knows, she admitted, But now you know the truth, and the truth doesn't always help the one who speaks it. I stepped closer, my voice steady. I won't shout. I'll do something else. I'll let the law and the evidence speak for me. And you, Marianne, will be the beginning. She curled her lip, then glanced at the painting in the corner as if seeing an empty future there. What can you do? She asked. Do you have proof? A recording is nothing. I have Luke, I replied. And I have someone who knows how to connect the traces into a whole. Your recorded admission is very valuable, especially combined with bank transfers and forged documents. Marianne laughed, no longer triumphant. So you'll dare to bring this into broad daylight? Dare to expose Daniel's mother? I looked straight at her. I don't need to be brave. I'm doing this for justice. And I'm doing it for myself. She lit a cigarette, her movements those of someone trying to hide emotion. Smoke curled around her face, softening the sharp edges of pretense. If you're going to play the justice game, remember every scar has someone behind it. And those behind it rarely stand alone. Her words were both a reminder and a warning. I wasn't afraid of those behind it. I was afraid of something else, that I might lose myself in the process of revenge. But at that very moment, another resolve rose within me, not to let betrayal destroy what was left of my life. In the days after meeting Marianne, I lived like someone walking through fog. Every confession she'd made in that gallery replayed in my head dozens of times, until I memorized every breath, every mocking laugh. It was like a melody I had to keep listening to so I wouldn't forget where I stood or why I had to keep going. Luke came to my house on Monday morning, carrying his laptop and the weary look of someone who hadn't slept for 2 nights. He spread all the papers across the table: transfer receipts, copies of bank transactions, ownership records of the Savannah house, every sheet, every stamp, every signature. Among the cold stack of white pages lay a small silver USB drive containing Marianne's recorded confession. Clarice, Luke said, his voice hoarse from exhaustion, this is enough to take them to court. But if you hand it to the authorities, it'll take months. Esther has her own lawyers, her connections, her time. You don't. Do you have a faster way? He hesitated briefly, then opened another document, a draft of a plan he had typed. At the top, bold letters read, Public strategy. We make it public, he said. Not on social media, on television. A local station, credible enough not to get pulled, wide enough to spread fast. But to do this, you'll need to hide your identity. Are you ready for that? I pressed my lips together. The truth had slept too long under their control, and if I woke it, someone was bound to bleed. But silence meant letting others rewrite history. I couldn't allow that. Do it, I said softly. As for my identity, keep it hidden. I don't need anyone to know who I am. It's enough that they know the truth. We spent 3 days gathering, editing, and compiling evidence. Luke contacted an old journalist friend, Rebecca, who had left the media after a buried scandal. When she heard Esther Reed's name, she fell silent for a long moment, then said, I've heard stories about her. If what you have is real, I'll air it. The recording took place in a small room behind Luke's law office. I sat in the dark, my voice the only part revealed, while Rebecca read the narration, the secret within the Savannah estate, a marriage that hid a financial crime. When I heard my own voice in the report, my heartbeat slowed. Every detail unfolded. Hidden transactions worth millions of dollars. Forged contracts with my signature. Marianne's recorded confession naming Esther as the one giving orders. And finally, the image of the Savannah mansion, the place where it all began, now a symbol of an empire built on lies. The program aired on Friday evening. There was no image of me, no mention of my name, but I knew Esther would recognize it. She always did when someone dared to touch what she believed was hers. That night, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Messages, calls, unknown numbers flashing and disappearing. Luke told me to turn it off, but I couldn't. I needed to listen. I needed to know their reactions. Near midnight, a call came from Daniel's number. I let it ring 5 times before answering. Clarice. His voice was rough, almost frightened. What have you done? Nothing but what should have been done long ago, I said, calm enough to surprise even myself. You don't understand. My mother's furious. She's reaping what she's sown, I interrupted. Daniel, If you want to save yourself, cooperate. Otherwise, I'll make sure everything comes out, including your part." The line went silent. I knew he wouldn't dare answer. Beneath Daniel's weakness was survival instinct, and that would drive him to save himself the same way he once betrayed me. By betraying her. By the next morning, the national news had picked up the story from the local station. Within hours, every newspaper headline read, "Reed family, accused of embezzling assets, forging estate documents." Images of Esther Reed flooded every outlet, from news sites to television networks. The police ordered an urgent investigation, and by the same day, Reed Holdings accounts were frozen. Luke came to my house, his face lighter than I'd ever seen it. "We did it," he said. "The company's frozen, the police are in, and Daniel, I heard he's left the house. Looks like he wants to be a witness to cut his sentence." That afternoon, as Luke prepared to leave, his phone rang. He looked at the screen and frowned. "State Notary Archives of Georgia," he said quietly. "Something about the Savannah records." He listened, nodding, and his expression gradually changed. When he hung up, he sat down across from me. "Clarice." His voice was low. "They found an older contract. Signed C. Hale." C. Hale. My maiden name. "Yes. But the person who signed it wasn't you." He hesitated. "It was your mother." "My mother, the woman who avoided talking about the past, who always said my grandfather's assets had been lost. Why was her name on those documents?" Luke looked at me, his eyes a mix of sympathy and caution. "She might have been involved in the first transfer. Maybe Esther exploited that." All sound seemed erased from my head, leaving only the slow, heavy thud of my heartbeat, painful and bewildering. Luke stayed quiet, his eyes telling me what he knew I wasn't ready to hear. "Do you want me to verify it?" he asked softly. "No need. I recognize my mother's handwriting. She wrote to me hundreds of times." I held the paper, tracing the lines gently, as if touching the past. Back then, she'd sit by the window, writing little notes reminding me to eat breakfast, not to forget my umbrella, not to trust too easily. I never imagined that in the end, she'd be the one to forget that advice. Luke slid another file toward me, his tone deepening. "Esther not only found your mother, she used her for years. They exchanged through intermediaries. Your mother provided information about the Hale estate, in return receiving steady investment payments to cover her debts." I slowly looked up, my gaze cold as steel. "Debts? To whom?" "A shell finance company, but when traced back, it's a subsidiary of Reed Holdings." "Meaning Esther was the creditor." A bitter smile crossed my lips. It was like a cruel joke written by fate itself. Esther controlled Daniel through motherhood, and me through the woman who gave me life. "Luke," I said quietly but firmly, "I need to see my mother. Today." He didn't ask questions. He knew this was no longer about law or contracts. It was a wound only confrontation could close, or let bleed forever. That afternoon, I drove to the small house in the suburbs where my mother had lived alone since my father's death. It was the same as always. The peeling wooden porch, the rocking chair swaying in the breeze, the lavender pot withering under the sunday. I stood on the steps for a long time, my hand hovering before I could knock. She opened the door before I could call out. Her eyes were swollen, her hair loosely tied, her face aged by decades since I last saw her. Her gaze met mine, shock, then fear, then despair. "Clarice," she said, voice trembling. You know?" I stepped inside and closed the door softly behind me. "I didn't want to believe it, Mom. But now I can't not know." She backed away, sinking into a chair, her hands gripping each other tightly. "I didn't know they'd hurt you. I thought I was reclaiming your father's share. What he rightfully deserved." I looked around the room that had once been the safest place in my world. On the table still sat my father's smiling photo, his gentle eyes watching. I moved closer, my voice low. "Dad died in an accident, but his assets were seized by his former secretary Esther. You worked with her, didn't you?" My mother lowered her head. No denial left. "They came to me right after he died. They said they could help me recover his share. I signed a few papers, thought it was for formalities. Then the payments started small, regular. I had debts after the shop failed. I thought they genuinely wanted to help." Her voice shook, brittle like dry leaves brushing the wind. I looked at her for a long time. I wanted to be angry, to scream, to throw everything between us out of that room. But in the dim afternoon light, all I saw was a small, fragile woman, both foolish and tragic, someone swept into the machinery of deceit, never realizing she'd been used all along. "Did you know she used my name to legalize the transfer?" I asked, my voice tightening. She looked up, eyes wide. "Clarice, I didn't know. They said it was to confirm the inheritance. I never thought they'd use your name." Tears fell onto her rough hands. I turned away, unable to bear the sight of the woman who once taught me honesty, now kneeling before the very deceit she helped create. "Can you forgive me?" she whispered, barely audible. I had forgiven Daniel, forgiven Marianne, only to be crushed again. But this was my mother. Her blood ran through my veins. And maybe that was why this wound hurt more than all the others. "I don't know, Mom," I said softly, eyes on the window. "I only know that what you did." Esther turned into a weapon. "Not to steal Dad's legacy, but to destroy me." She buried her face in her hands, sobbing. The small room suddenly felt suffocating, not because of its size, but because of all the things left unsaid for years. Luke called, his voice echoing through the speaker. "Clarice, I checked everything. Esther used the same papers your mother signed 20 years ago to set up a fake trust. That's the foundation of her entire financial empire." "Thank you, Luke. I'll times 2,000 time. Handle the rest." I hung up and looked at my mother one last time. In her eyes, regret and fear tangled like two streams that could never part. I stepped closer, placing my hand gently on her shoulder. "Not forgiveness, just a period at the end of a conversation that had gone on too long. I won't let them do any more harm." The morning of the trial, the sky was gray, as if even the heavens were holding their breath. I stood behind the glass window of the preparation room, watching the crowd of reporters and the flashing cameras outside. For months, every path, every question, every ache had led to this moment. But when it finally arrived, what I felt wasn't triumph, it was an odd calmness, as if my soul had walked through too much wreckage to tremble at the sound of a gavel. Luke entered, holding a thick folder. He looked at me, trust shining in his eyes. "Clarice," he said in his low voice, "it's time." We left the room, walking down the marble hallway. Our footsteps echoed steadily, blending with the faint murmur from the courtroom ahead. Before the hearing, Rebecca forwarded Luke a CCTV extract from the cafe where Esther met my mother, accompanied by a forensic integrity report. The judge entered and tapped the gavel lightly. The room fell silent. "The court is now in session." The prosecutor spoke first, his tone firm and precise. "Mrs. Esther Reed and her son, Mr. Daniel Reed, are charged with asset fraud, document forgery, and money laundering. We have evidence proving they used forged contracts to seize the inheritance belonging to the Hale family." Each word landed like a nail sealing the coffin of the Reed empire. I sat still, gripping the edge of my chair, watching Esther. Her head remained high, eyes blazing, as if daring the world to break her. But I could see it, the one thing missing in her gaze: control. When it was our turn, Luke rose. His voice was calm, steady, every word weighted with conviction. "Your Honor, what Mrs. Esther Reed did goes far beyond financial fraud. It is a carefully orchestrated pattern of deceit spanning years, designed to steal another family's legacy. And today we will prove it with evidence she cannot deny." He plugged in the USB drive. The large screen flickered on, and the courtroom sank into silence. On screen appeared Esther, sitting in a luxury cafe, facing my mother. Her voice was cool and measured, but every word was clear. "We have an agreement, yes? You need to sign here, I'll handle the rest. Clarice doesn't need to know. She'll have enough to live on. The inheritance should return to where it belongs." My mother's weak reply followed, then the video froze. The stillness that followed was absolute. Esther's fingers tightened on the armrest. Her face went pale, a flicker of panic flashed in her eyes. She turned toward Daniel, as if to speak, but he wouldn't meet her gaze. Luke stepped forward, his tone unwavering. "This recording has been verified by an independent forensic expert. Combined with the bank statements and forged contracts, it proves beyond doubt that Mrs. Esther Reed exploited the plaintiff's mother, manipulating and falsifying the Hale estate records. A wave of whispers rippled through the room. Esther tried to stay composed, but when the prosecutor questioned her, her voice trembled. I only wanted to preserve those assets, to keep them from people who didn't deserve them. People who didn't deserve them. The prosecutor repeated, "You mean Mr. Hale's own granddaughter, the rightful heir?" Esther fell silent. When Marianne was called to testify, she looked at me. There was a flicker of remorse in her eyes that I didn't need but couldn't deny. "Esther directed everything," she said hoarsely. "She told me if I helped Daniel withdraw money and sign the transfers, she'd erase my debts. I did it, because I was afraid." Behind me, I heard the same clicking of cameras. Luke leaned toward me and whispered, "It's all going our way." Amid the courtroom's chill, something inside me cracked a memory of the woman I once called mother-in-law. After nearly an hour of deliberation, the judge returned, his voice firm. "The court finds the defendants, Esther Reed and Daniel Reed, guilty of asset fraud, document forgery, and money laundering. Sentencing will follow federal guidelines. All properties belonging to the Hale family will be restored to the rightful heir, Mrs. Clarice Hale." Esther didn't look at me as the officers approached. She turned toward the window, where faint autumn light streamed in weak and cold. Daniel, in handcuffs, kept his head bowed, hair falling over his forehead. Luke placed a hand on my shoulder. "You got everything back." "No, Luke. I reclaimed what should never have been stolen." Outside, the crowd's noise swelled, cameras turned toward me, but I walked on without looking back. Inside, I heard it, the wind rushing through the courthouse halls, the sound of freedom, carrying the echo of justice finally restored. The wind from the Savannah River carried the scent of salt and damp wood from the restored old house. I stood on the stone steps, gazing at the bronze plaque newly fixed to the door, "Hale Residence, 1892. The name had finally returned to its place after years buried beneath layers of greed. Yet, somehow I didn't feel joy. The house looked the same as ever, high wooden ceilings, arched windows, wrought iron stair rails. I had repainted it all, replaced the floors, repaired the roof, but the last room at the end of the hall, my mother's room, I left untouched. The faint lavender scent still lingered, mixed with the smell of old paper. I couldn't bring myself to clean it. I was afraid that if I erased everything, I'd forget who I once was. That afternoon, a letter arrived from the prison. A gray envelope, no return address, but I knew the slanted handwriting immediately. Daniel's. I hesitated for a few seconds before opening it. "Clarice, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I want you to know that everything I did was because I wanted my mother's love. I've lived my whole life in her shadow, and by the time I realized it, I wasn't myself anymore. I hope someday you find the peace I never will." I folded the letter and set it on the windowsill. Daniel was no longer the enemy. He was simply a broken creation of the woman he had spent his life trying to please. Just like me once trying to please people unworthy of my love. Late that evening, Luke came by. He brought a bottle of white wine. The warm glow from the window softened his face after months of strain. We sat on the steps, quietly watching the magnolias bloom in the garden. "This house looks better than I imagined," he said. After a while, he asked the question I knew he'd been holding back. "Clarice, do you regret any of it? After everything?" "No. Because sometimes to find yourself, you have to lose everything." It wasn't philosophy, it was truth. If I hadn't lost love, I'd never have seen false loyalty. If I hadn't lost faith, I'd never have learned to stand on my own reason. The wind stirred again, brushing the curtain by the window. In the glass, I saw my reflection, not the bride standing among white roses years ago, nor the desperate woman staring at a forged signature. Now, in that misted reflection, I saw another Clarice. My eyes were the same, but the gaze had changed, no longer seeking to be understood, only strong enough never to bow again. Luke stood and said he'd return in the morning to discuss the company. I watched his silhouette fade down the gravel path. His footsteps faded into the wind, and the house fell quiet, the kind of quiet that comes when you've won everything, yet feel nothing. I went inside, turning off the lights one by one, leaving only the last room at the end of the hall aglow. There I had kept an old armchair and the shawl my mother used to wear. I sat down, my hand brushing the worn fabric. "I'm not angry anymore, Mom," I whispered, barely loud enough for myself to hear. "But I can't forget." Outside, the wind slipped through the window frame, mingling with the hum of crickets and the scent of wet grass. I closed my eyes, letting it all drift. In the glass's reflection, I saw again the woman once abandoned on her wedding night, wide-eyed, trembling amid the scent of white roses. But this time, she wasn't afraid. She looked straight ahead at herself, the woman who had endured betrayal and loss, yet kept her dignity intact. Maybe after everything, what remains isn't hatred or tears but peace. The kind that comes when you know you've walked the whole path, no matter how painful. I still live in that house, where every whisper of wind through the windows reminds me, no one can take away the courage of someone who has already lost everything. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever gone through something that changed you forever, share it with me. And don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe so we can keep walking together through the journeys ahead. Where are you watching from?